At my daughter's wedding, I found my seat next to the garbage bins. That's when I realized I wasn't just excluded from the celebration, I was being erased from her life entirely. What I did next made headlines and destroyed the perfect wedding I had paid for. Before I reveal what I did that destroyed their perfect wedding, tell me in the comments, what would you have done? And smash that subscribe button if you think every mother deserves respect. My name is Julia, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes loving your children means teaching them that respect isn't optional, even from family. It all started 8 months before the wedding, when Emily announced her engagement to James Hampton. I remember that phone call like it was yesterday. Her voice was breathless with excitement as she told me about the proposal, the ring, the future she was planning with this man from one of the city's most prominent families. I was genuinely thrilled for her. Emily had always been ambitious, driven, someone who set goals and achieved them. She'd graduated summa cum laude from law school, landed a position at a prestigious firm, and now she was marrying into the Hampton family. They owned a chain of luxury hotels across 3 states and moved in circles I'd only read about in society magazines. But from the very first planning meeting, I felt something shift between us. It was subtle at first, like a change in the weather that you sense before you see the clouds gathering. We met at Patricia Hampton's house, and walking into that space was like entering a different world. Everything was perfect in a way that seemed almost inhuman. Crystal chandeliers hung from soaring ceilings, fresh orchids adorned every surface, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a home where people actually lived. Patricia herself was equally intimidating. She was the kind of woman who had probably never had a hair out of place in her entire life. Her makeup was flawless, her jewelry understated but obviously expensive, and when she smiled, it was the practiced expression of someone who had learned early that appearances were everything. "Julia," she said, greeting me with air kisses that didn't actually touch my cheeks. "How wonderful to finally meet Emily's mother. I've heard so much about you." I doubted that was true, given how little Emily had told me about the Hampton family, but I smiled and followed her into the living room where Emily was already seated, looking more polished than I'd ever seen her. As Patricia outlined her vision for what she called the event of the season, I watched my daughter's transformation. Her eyes lit up as Patricia described imported flowers from Holland, a celebrity chef she knew personally, and a guest list that read like a who's who of high society. This wasn't just a wedding Emily was planning. It was her debut into a world she'd always dreamed of joining. "Now, Julia," Patricia said, turning to me with that practiced smile, "we need to discuss the financial arrangements. These kinds of celebrations require a certain level of investment to maintain the standards our families are accustomed to." The budget they presented made my head spin. $85,000. More money than I'd ever seen in one place. More than I'd made in 2 years at my current job. But Emily's face was radiant as she looked at the plans spread across Patricia's coffee table, and I found myself nodding along, agreeing to contribute whatever I could. "Wonderful," Patricia said, making notes in her leather-bound planner. "I'll have my assistant send you the vendor contracts. We'll need deposits within the week to secure the best services." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my checkbook, bank statements, and a calculator, trying to figure out how to make the impossible possible. I had my retirement savings, some investments from my late husband Robert's life insurance policy, and the small inheritance from my mother that I'd been saving for emergencies. I could do this. I could give Emily the wedding of her dreams and prove to the Hampton family that I belonged in their world, that I was worthy of being Emily's mother. Over the next few months, I wrote check after check, $5,000 for the venue deposit, $8,000 for the catering down payment, $3,000 for the flowers, $2,000 for the photographer. Each payment felt like an investment in Emily's happiness, in our relationship, in securing my place in her new life. But as the wedding approached, something strange began happening. The planning meetings started being scheduled at times I couldn't attend because of work. When I asked to reschedule, I was told the vendors were only available at specific times and we'd have to work around their schedules. Decisions were being made without consulting me. I'd arrive at meetings to find that the menu had already been finalized, the flowers chosen, the music selected. When I tried to offer input, Patricia would smile that practiced smile and say, "Oh, we've already handled that." Emily has such wonderful taste. The guest list became a particular source of tension. I'd asked several times to review it, wanting to make sure my family and friends were included, but Emily kept putting me off. "It's all handled, Mom," she'd say, waving her hand dismissively whenever I brought it up. "Patricia has everything under control. You're going to love it." I started to feel like a stranger in my own daughter's wedding planning. Phone calls went unreturned for days. Emails were answered with brief, almost business-like responses. When I suggested having lunch to discuss details, Emily was always too busy with work, with dress fittings, with meetings I wasn't invited to. 3 weeks before the wedding, I received my invitation in the mail, my own daughter's wedding invitation, delivered like I was a distant acquaintance, rather than the mother of the bride who had financed most of the celebration. The invitation itself was beautiful, printed on heavy cream paper with elegant gold lettering. But inside, along with the details about the ceremony and reception, was a small card that made my heart sink. Table assignment, table 12. I called Emily immediately, hoping there had been some mistake. "Sweetheart, I got my table assignment. Where exactly will I be sitting?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, long enough that I could hear my own heartbeat. "Table 12, she said finally. "It's perfect for you, Mom. You'll be with some really wonderful people. Who will I be sitting with?" Another pause. "Just some family friends. People you'll really connect with. They're very down to earth." Something in her tone bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Maybe I was being oversensitive. This was Emily's big day, and I wanted everything to be perfect for her. "Will I be near the family tables?" "Mom, you are family. Of course you'll be with family." But she didn't answer my question directly, and when I tried to ask for more details, she said she had to go, that Patricia was calling with an urgent vendor issue. 2 weeks before the wedding, I drove to the venue to drop off some decorations Emily had asked me to store. The vineyard was beautiful, sprawling across rolling hills with views that took your breath away. I could see why Emily had fallen in love with the location. I met with the event coordinator, a friendly woman named Margaret, who seemed genuinely excited about the celebration. "Your daughter is going to be such a beautiful bride," she said as we walked through the spaces that would be transformed for the wedding. "And what a celebration this will be. The Hampton family always throws the most elegant events. Could you show me where table 12 will be?" I asked. "I'm curious about the layout." Margaret consulted her clipboard, flipping through several pages before finding what she was looking for. Her expression changed slightly, a flicker of something I couldn't quite read. "Table 12, she said slowly. "Let me double-check this with the final seating chart. Sometimes there are last-minute changes." She made a phone call, speaking in hushed tones that I couldn't quite overhear. When she hung up, she looked uncomfortable. "Table 12 is confirmed," she said. "It's a smaller, more intimate setting. Some families prefer that for certain guests." I asked her to show me, but she said the spaces were still being set up, and it would be easier to see everything on the day of the wedding. Something in her manner suggested she was being evasive, but I didn't want to cause problems so close to the big day. The week before the wedding, I went shopping for my dress. I wanted to look perfect, to fit seamlessly into Emily's new world. I found a beautiful blue dress in soft silk, elegant but not flashy, expensive enough to show respect for the occasion, but not so elaborate as to upstage the bride. I also made an appointment to have my hair and makeup done professionally. It was an expense I couldn't really afford, but this was my daughter's wedding. I wanted to look like I belonged among the Hampton family guests. 3 days before the wedding, I picked up my gift for Emily and James. It was my most treasured possession, my grandmother's pearl necklace. The pearls had been in my family for 4 generations, passed down from mother to daughter as a symbol of love and continuity. I'd worn them at my own wedding when Robert clasped them around my neck and whispered, "Now you're truly a Miller." They'd been with me through every important moment of my marriage, every milestone of Emily's childhood. I'd planned to give them to Emily on her 18th birthday, but she'd been so focused on college and career that the moment never seemed right. I had the necklace professionally cleaned and restrung, spending money I couldn't really spare because I wanted it to be perfect. I also had it appraised for insurance purposes, and was surprised to learn it was worth significantly more than I'd realized. But its real value wasn't monetary. It was the love and history it represented. As I wrapped the necklace in tissue paper and placed it in an elegant gift box, I imagined Emily's face when she opened it. I pictured telling her about her great-great-grandmother who had worn these pearls as a young bride, about the strength and grace they represented, about how wearing them had always made me feel connected to something larger than myself. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, one of those perfect June days that felt like a promise of good things to come. I woke early, too excited to sleep, and spent extra time getting ready. I wanted everything to be perfect. My hair appointment was at 9, Makeup at 11. The stylist did a beautiful job, creating an elegant updo that made me feel sophisticated and polished. The makeup artist enhanced my features without making me look overdone. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who could hold her own in any social situation. I arrived at the Vineyard early, partly because I was excited and partly because I wanted to help with any last-minute preparations. The venue was being transformed into something magical. White flowers and flowing fabric created an atmosphere of elegance and romance. The main tent was enormous, filled with round tables draped in ivory linens and centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly salary. I parked and walked toward the reception area, carrying Emily's gift and feeling nervous but excited. This was it. This was the moment my daughter would become Mrs. James Hampton, and I would officially become part of their world. But as I approached the reception area, following the signs that directed guests to their table assignments, something felt wrong. The main tent was clearly visible, filled with beautifully appointed tables and elegant decorations. But according to my table card, I was supposed to go in a different direction entirely. I followed the signs, past the main tent, past the cocktail area where servers were setting up bars with crystal glasses and premium spirits, around to the side of the building where the utility areas were located. And there, in a forgotten corner next to the maintenance shed and garbage bins, sat a single table with a small placard reading Table 12. My heart stopped. This couldn't be right. This had to be some terrible mistake. The table was clearly an afterthought, set up with basic folding chairs and a paper tablecloth that looked like it had been purchased at a discount store. The centerpiece was a small arrangement of wilted flowers that looked like they'd been rescued from yesterday's clearance bin. The smell from the nearby dumpsters was unmistakable, a mixture of food waste and cleaning chemicals that made me feel nauseous. I stood there for several minutes, staring at this pathetic setup, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There had to be an explanation. Maybe this was temporary. Maybe I'd be moved once the family photos were finished. Maybe there was some logistical reason for this arrangement that would become clear later. A young catering staff member approached, looking embarrassed and uncomfortable. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Miller?" I nodded, unable to speak. "I'm so sorry about the location," she said, glancing around nervously. "We were told this was temporary, that you'd be moved once the ceremony was over. But honestly, this doesn't seem right. None of us understood why a family member would be seated here." Her kindness only made the situation more humiliating. Even the staff could see how wrong this was. "Is there someone I can talk to about this?" I asked. She looked around nervously. "The event coordinator is dealing with some crisis with the flowers right now, but I could try to find her if you want." I was about to say yes when I heard voices approaching. Through the hedges that partially screened my sad little table, I could see Emily and Patricia walking toward the main tent, deep in conversation. "The photographers will want family shots right after the ceremony," Patricia was saying. "We'll need to keep the timeline tight. What about Mom?" Emily asked. My heart lifted. She was thinking about me, making sure I was included. "What about her?" Patricia's voice was dismissive. "For the family photos." There was a pause. "Darling, we discussed this. The formal photos are for immediate family. Your mother will have plenty of opportunities for informal shots later. But she is immediate family." "Of course she is," Patricia said in a tone that suggested the opposite. "But we need to think about the image we're presenting. These photos will be in the society pages, possibly featured in magazines. We want everything to look cohesive." Emily was quiet for a moment. "I suppose you're right." Those 4 words broke my heart more completely than anything else that had happened. "I suppose you're right." My own daughter agreeing that I didn't belong in her wedding photos because I might spoil the image they wanted to present. They moved on, their voices fading as they headed toward the main tent. I sat down heavily in one of the folding chairs, clutching Emily's gift and trying not to cry. I sat at that table for what felt like hours, watching the wedding preparations unfold from my isolated corner. Servers rushed back and forth, carrying trays of champagne glasses and elegant hors d'oeuvres that would never make it to my table. Florists made last-minute adjustments to centerpieces that cost more than my monthly rent, while I stared at my wilted discount flowers. Guests began arriving, and I recognized many faces from Emily's childhood. Her high school friends, now successful professionals, laughed and chatted as they found their tables in the main tent. Neighbors who had watched her grow up, relatives who had celebrated every milestone with us, colleagues from her law firm, all of them seated among the crystal and fine china while I remained hidden behind the utility shed. Some of them spotted me as they walked past, and I saw the confusion in their eyes. They would start to approach, then hesitate, clearly wondering why the mother of the bride was sitting alone next to the garbage bins. A few waved awkwardly before hurrying on, not wanting to get involved in whatever awkward family drama was playing out. The ceremony began at 3 o'clock. I could hear the string quartet playing Pachelbel's Canon as guests took their seats. From my position, I could catch glimpses of the proceedings through the gaps in the hedgerow, but I couldn't see much. I watched Emily walk down the aisle on the arm of Robert's brother, who had agreed to stand in as father of the bride since Robert had passed away 5 years earlier. She looked radiant in her designer gown, a creation that had cost more than my car and taken 6 months to order from Paris. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate updo, adorned with tiny diamonds, and her smile was luminous as she approached James at the altar. James looked handsome in his custom tuxedo, standing tall and confident beside the minister. The Hampton family occupied the entire front section on the groom's side, while Emily's side looked noticeably sparse. My absence was creating an obvious imbalance, but no one seemed concerned about addressing it. The ceremony was beautiful, even from my distant vantage point. The minister spoke about love, commitment, and family bonds. He talked about how marriage brings two families together, creating new connections and strengthening existing ones. The irony wasn't lost on me, as I sat alone with the garbage, clearly not part of the family unity he was describing. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in applause and cheers. I clapped too, from my lonely corner, genuinely happy for Emily, despite everything that had happened. Whatever issues existed between us, this was still my daughter's wedding day, and I wanted it to be perfect for her. The cocktail hour began immediately after the ceremony. Servers appeared with trays of champagne and elaborate canapés, circulating among the guests who mingled on the lawn overlooking the vineyard. I watched families reuniting, college friends catching up, business associates networking over drinks that cost more per glass than I typically spent on a bottle of wine. No one came to my table during cocktail hour. No server offered me champagne or hors d'oeuvres. No guests wandered over to chat. I sat in my designer dress with my professional hair and makeup, feeling more invisible than I'd ever felt in my life. Around 4:30, a harried-looking server finally remembered my existence and brought me a plate of food. It was clearly assembled from whatever was left over from the main reception: cold chicken breast, wilted salad, and a dinner roll that had seen better days. The champagne was flat, probably left over from yesterday's event. I ate mechanically, tasting nothing, feeling like I was watching someone else's life unfold. My phone buzzed with text from friends who couldn't attend the wedding. Sarah had sent several messages asking for photos and updates. "How's the wedding? You must be so emotional. Send pictures of you and Emily." I stared at the screen, unable to respond. What could I say? That I was sitting next to dumpsters while my daughter celebrated without me? The reception dinner began at 6. Through the tent walls, I could hear the clinking of glasses and the murmur of conversation as hundreds of guests enjoyed a meal prepared by the celebrity chef Patricia had insisted on hiring. The menu had been meticulously planned over several months, featuring dishes I'd never heard of with ingredients imported from around the world. Meanwhile, I finished my sad plate of leftovers and waited. For what? I wasn't sure. Maybe someone would remember I existed. Maybe Emily would come looking for me. Maybe this was all some elaborate test of my patience and devotion. The speeches began around 7:30. I could hear them clearly through the tent fabric, each one more eloquent and heartfelt than the last. James's father spoke about family values and the importance of maintaining traditions across generations. He talked about how proud they were to welcome Emily into their family, how she embodied everything they valued in a daughter-in-law. Patricia gave a speech about gaining a daughter and losing a son. She spoke about watching Emily grow into the remarkable woman she'd become, about how perfectly she fit into their family's vision for the future. She talked about the wedding as a symbol of two families becoming one, creating bonds that would last for generations. Emily's college roommate told funny stories about their adventures together. Her law school friends spoke about her determination and brilliance. James's best friend recounted tales of their friendship and how Emily had made James a better man. Through it all, no one mentioned the mother of the bride. No one acknowledged the woman who had worked 3 jobs to put Emily through college, who had stayed up countless nights helping with homework, who had sacrificed her own dreams to ensure Emily could achieve hers. No one spoke about the mother who had sold her jewelry to pay for soccer camp, who had taken out loans for law school, who had given everything she had to give Emily the foundation for her success. As I listened to speech after speech celebrating Emily's achievements while ignoring my role in making them possible, something inside me began to shift. This wasn't just thoughtlessness or poor planning. This was deliberate erasure of my place in Emily's life. I looked down at the gift box in my lap, containing the pearl necklace that had been in my family for 4 generations. I'd imagined this moment for years, placing those pearls around Emily's neck, telling her about the strong women who had worn them before her, explaining what they represented about our family's history and values. But Emily didn't want our family's history. She wanted to create a new narrative, one where she emerged fully formed from the Hampton family's world of privilege and social status. I was the most visible reminder of her actual origins, the biggest obstacle to the story she wanted to tell about herself. The dancing began around 9 o'clock. Through gaps in the tent fabric, I could see couples swirling across the dance floor to music provided by a band that cost more than my annual salary. The lighting was perfect, the atmosphere magical, everything Emily had dreamed of for her special day. I watched the father-daughter dance between Emily and Robert's brother, the one I should have been part of if Robert were still alive. I watched the mother-son dance between James and Patricia, the moment that highlighted my absence more than any other. In the traditional wedding structure, that should have been my moment too, dancing with the son-in-law I was supposedly gaining. But there was no dance for me, no moment of recognition, no acknowledgement that I existed at all. I was a ghost at my own daughter's wedding, present but invisible, paying for a celebration that actively excluded me. Around 10 o'clock, I made a decision. I stood up from my table, my legs stiff from sitting for hours, and walked to my car. I needed to think, to process what was happening, to decide how to respond to this unprecedented humiliation. I drove to Sarah's house, the one person I knew I could trust with the truth of what was happening. She opened the door and immediately saw something was wrong. "Julia, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at the wedding?" I walked past her into the house without answering. She followed me to her kitchen, where she put the kettle on without being asked. Sarah had been my best friend for 15 years. She knew when words weren't enough and tea was required. "Tell me everything," she said, settling into the chair across from me. So I did. I told her about the table next to the garbage bins, about being excluded from photos, about sitting alone for hours while everyone else celebrated. I told her about the speeches that erased my existence, about watching my daughter's transformation into someone I barely recognized. Sarah's face grew darker with each detail. By the time I finished, she was gripping her teacup so tightly I thought it might break. "That ungrateful, selfish little," she began. "Don't," I interrupted. "She's still my daughter." "Is she, though?" Sarah asked quietly. "Because daughters don't treat their mothers like garbage." Literally. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her words settling between us. Finally, Sarah leaned forward. "What are you going to do?" I pulled out my phone and the folder of contracts I'd brought, thinking I might need them for some last-minute coordination. Now I looked at them with different eyes. Vendor agreements, payment schedules, final authorization requirements. "I'm thinking about all those deposits I paid," I said slowly, "and all the final payments that are still pending." Sarah's eyes widened as she understood what I was considering. "The final payments are due today?" I flipped through the contracts, checking the fine print I'd barely paid attention to when I was so eager to give Emily everything she wanted. Catering balance due by 3 p.m. on day of service, or service will be discontinued. Floral balance due before ceremony, or arrangements will be removed. Bar service requires final authorization before alcohol service can begin. "What time is it now?" Sarah asked. I checked my phone. 10:15. Some payments are already overdue. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "Are you actually considering this?" "I'm considering the fact that I just spent 7 hours sitting next to garbage bins at a wedding I paid for, watching my daughter celebrate her new life while pretending I don't exist. The wedding is almost over, though. Most of the damage is already done." I thought about that. She was right. The ceremony was complete. Dinner had been served. Speeches had been given. But the bar was still serving. The band was still playing. And there were hours of celebration left. Plus, this wasn't really about disrupting the wedding anymore. This was about drawing a line, establishing boundaries, refusing to accept unacceptable treatment. "Maybe," I said, "but there's still the after party, the late-night celebration, the brunch tomorrow. And more importantly, there's the principle of the thing." Sarah nodded slowly. "What do you need from me?" That simple question, asked without judgment or lectures about family loyalty, meant everything to me. Sarah understood that sometimes love requires tough choices, that sometimes protecting yourself is the most loving thing you can do. "I need to make some phone calls," I said, "and I need someone to remind me that I'm not crazy for feeling hurt by this." "You're not crazy," Sarah said firmly. "You're not even close to crazy. What they did to you today was cruel and unforgivable." I pulled up the contact information for the catering company first. My finger hovered over the call button for a long moment. Once I made this call, there would be no going back. Emily would know exactly who was responsible for whatever happened next. But as I thought about sitting at that table, smelling garbage while listening to speeches that erased my existence, my finger pressed the button. "Elegant Catering. This is Maria speaking. This is Julia Miller, calling about the Hampton Miller wedding." "Oh yes, Mrs. Miller. How is everything going? I hope our service has been satisfactory. Actually, I'm calling about the final payment." There was a pause. "The final payment that was due at 3 p.m.? "Yes. I'm afraid I won't be able to authorize that payment." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Mrs. Miller, our contract clearly states that service will be discontinued immediately if final payment isn't received." "I understand," I said quietly. "I'm sorry for any inconvenience." After I hung up, Sarah poured us both wine. "How do you feel?" "Terrified," I admitted, "and exhilarated, and like I might throw up." The florist was next, then the bar service, then the transportation company responsible for the late-night shuttle service. Each call was brief, professional, and devastating. With each conversation, I dismantled the perfect wedding I had helped create. By the time I finished making calls, it was nearly midnight. My phone had been buzzing constantly with calls from numbers I didn't recognize, but I let them all go to voicemail. And we see what Emily has learned about consequences. We didn't have to wait long. At 12:30 a.m., my phone rang with Emily's number. I let it go to voicemail. Then James called. Then a number I didn't recognize. Then Emily again. I played the first voicemail on speaker so Sarah could hear. "Mom, what the hell is going on? The catering staff just stopped serving. The bar shut down, and half our vendors are packing up. People are asking what's happening, and I don't know what to tell them. Call me back immediately." The second voicemail was from James. "Mrs. Miller, there seems to be some confusion with the vendors. Could you please call us back so we can sort this out?" The third was Emily again, her voice rising in panic. "Mom, I know you're upset about something, but this is my wedding day. Please don't do this. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it tomorrow. Please call me back." Sarah and I looked at each other. "Part of me wants to feel guilty," I said. "Don't," Sarah replied firmly. "Remember where you were sitting while they were having the time of their lives." At 1 a.m., a car pulled into my driveway. Through the window, I could see Emily and James getting out, both still in their wedding attire but looking significantly less polished than they had at the ceremony. "Should I answer the door?" I asked Sarah. "That's up to you. But remember, you don't owe them an explanation for refusing to pay for a party that treated you like garbage." I opened the door to find Emily with mascara-streaked cheeks and James looking confused and embarrassed. Emily pushed past me into the house without invitation. "What did you do?" she demanded. "Half our wedding just disappeared. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" "Do I know how humiliating it is?" I repeated slowly. "Emily, I spent your entire wedding sitting next to dumpsters. I think I have some idea about humiliation." James stepped forward. "Mrs. Miller, I think there might have been a misunderstanding about the seating arrangements." "There was no misunderstanding," I said. "Your mother seated me next to garbage bins because she didn't want me visible during your celebration, and Emily went along with it." Emily's face flushed. "That table was temporary. You were supposed to be moved after the ceremony. Were you planning to tell me that? Because I sat there for 7 hours, Emily. 7 hours next to garbage, watching everyone else enjoy the wedding I paid for." "You didn't pay for the whole wedding," Emily protested. I went to my kitchen and returned with the folder of receipts and contracts. $63,000, Emily. $63,000 of my retirement savings, my inheritance, my life insurance money. What exactly did the Hampton family contribute besides humiliation? James looked at the receipts, his face pale. "I didn't realize." "Of course you didn't," I said, "because nobody bothered to tell you that the woman sitting with the trash actually paid for your celebration." Emily was crying now, but her tears felt manipulative rather than genuine. "Mom, we can fix this. The vendors can come back tomorrow. We can have a do-over. There's nothing to fix, Emily. The wedding is over. You made your choices, and I made mine. What's that supposed to mean?" I looked at my daughter. This woman I'd raised and sacrificed for and loved unconditionally, and saw a stranger looking back at me. It means I'm done funding a relationship where I'm treated like an embarrassment. It means I'm done accepting crumbs of affection from someone I've given everything to. It means I'm done pretending this is normal or acceptable or something I should be grateful for. Emily stared at me, shock replacing anger on her face. Are you cutting me off? I'm setting boundaries, I corrected. Something I should have done years ago. James looked between us, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding in my living room. Maybe we should all take some time to cool down and discuss this tomorrow, when emotions aren't running so high. No, Emily said sharply. We're settling this now. Mom, I need you to call those vendors back and fix this. People are talking, posting on social media, asking questions. This is becoming a public embarrassment. The fact that her primary concern was public embarrassment, rather than the pain she'd caused me, told me everything I needed to know about where we stood. Emily, I said quietly, I'm not calling anyone back. The wedding is over, and so is my willingness to finance your life while you treat me like something to be ashamed of. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and stormed out of the house. James lingered for a moment, looking like he wanted to say something, then followed her. Sarah emerged from the kitchen where she'd been giving us privacy. How do you feel? Like I just divorced my own daughter, I said, and like it was long overdue. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages. Emily had called 17 times overnight. James had called 6 times. There were voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize, texts from relatives asking what was happening, and missed calls from local news stations. Apparently, someone at the wedding had posted about the vendor situation on social media, and the story was spreading. The hashtag wedding disaster was trending locally, with guests sharing their own accounts of what had happened. I read through some of the posts while drinking my coffee. Most were sympathetic to Emily and James, painting them as victims of vendor incompetence. But a few told a different story. One guest had written, "Something strange happened at the Hampton wedding last night. The mother of the bride was seated at a table by herself next to the maintenance area. Then all the vendors suddenly stopped service. Makes you wonder what really went on behind the scenes." Another post was more direct. "Just found out that the bride's mother paid for most of that wedding and was seated next to garbage bins. No wonder the vendors walked out when she stopped payment. Good for her." By noon, a local reporter had tracked down my phone number. "Mrs. Miller, this is Sandra Mitchell from Channel 9 News. We're covering the story about the disrupted wedding reception, and we'd love to get your perspective on what happened." I was about to decline when something stopped me. For months, Patricia Hampton had been controlling the narrative about this wedding. She'd made decisions about everything from seating arrangements to guest lists, always with an eye toward how things would look to their social circle. Maybe it was time for someone else to tell a story. "You know what?" I said. "Yes, let's talk." The interview was scheduled for the next day. Sarah helped me prepare, and we chose my blue dress again, the same one I'd worn to the wedding. I wanted people to see exactly what the mother of the bride had looked like when she was hidden away from the celebration. Sandra Mitchell turned out to be a sharp professional woman in her 40s who had clearly done her homework before the interview. She'd already spoken with several wedding guests and vendors. "Mrs. Miller," she began, "can you tell us what happened at your daughter's wedding?" I took a deep breath and told the truth, all of it. The months of planning where I was gradually excluded, the financial contributions that went unacknowledged, the seating arrangement that literally put me with the garbage, the speeches that erased my existence. "You paid for $63,000 of this wedding?" Sandra asked, consulting her notes. "I have the receipts," I said, pulling out the folder I'd brought. "Every deposit, every vendor contract, every payment authorization. And where were you seated during the reception?" I showed her the photo I'd taken on my phone, my lonely table next to the dumpsters with its paper tablecloth and wilted flowers. Sandra's eyebrows rose. "This is where the mother of the bride sat? This is where the mother of the bride sat? After contributing $63,000 to the celebration. What was going through your mind when you saw this seating arrangement?" I thought about that for a moment. I realized that I wasn't just being excluded from the party. I was being erased from my daughter's story. She wanted to present herself as someone who came from the Hampton family's world, and I was evidence that she actually came from somewhere much more ordinary. "Is that when you decided to cancel the vendor payments?" I decided that I wouldn't continue funding a celebration that treated me like an embarrassment. The vendors had contracts that required final payment for continued service. When I couldn't authorize those payments, they followed their contracts. Do you regret your decision? I looked directly into the camera. I regret that it came to this point. I regret that my relationship with my daughter deteriorated so badly that she thought this treatment was acceptable. But I don't regret standing up for my dignity. What would you say to other parents who might be facing similar situations? I'd say that love doesn't require you to accept humiliation. Support doesn't mean financing your own erasure. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is teach your children that respect isn't optional, even in family relationships. The interview aired that evening, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone rang constantly with calls from other parents sharing their own stories of being pushed aside by adult children. Local newspapers picked up the story. Social media exploded with opinions on both sides. The hashtag Team Mother of the Bride started trending alongside wedding disaster. Women shared stories of being excluded from family events they'd helped plan. Parents talked about funding celebrations where they were treated as afterthoughts. Grandparents described being made to feel unwelcome at gatherings in their own homes. But there was also backlash. Patricia Hampton gave her own interview, painting me as a vindictive woman who couldn't handle her daughter's success. The entire celebration was sabotaged by someone who couldn't bear to see Emily rising in the world, Patricia told the cameras, her pearl necklace catching the studio lights. It's tragic when family members can't celebrate each other's achievements, the reporter, to her credit, pressed back. But Mrs. Hampton, what about the seating arrangement? Multiple witnesses confirmed that Mrs. Miller was placed next to the service area. Patricia's composure cracked slightly. Seating charts are complex logistical arrangements. Perhaps there was some confusion. We have a photo of Mrs. Miller's table location, the reporter continued, showing the image I'd provided. Patricia's face went blank. No comment. The interview was a disaster for the Hampton family. Social media picked apart every word, creating memes of Patricia's shocked expression and turning her quotes into sarcastic catchphrases. 3 days later, I received a letter from Emily's lawyer demanding $5,000 in damages for the malicious disruption of the wedding. Sarah showed it to her husband Robert, who was a contract attorney. "This is nonsense," he said after reviewing the demand. She authorized vendor contracts that clearly stated payment requirements. When payment wasn't provided, the vendors followed their agreements. There's no legal basis for a damages claim. Robert offered to represent me, and within a week, he'd filed a countersuit for emotional distress, defamation, and breach of oral contract regarding my treatment at the wedding. "We won't win everything," he explained, "but they'll think twice about pursuing their frivolous lawsuit." He was right. Within days of receiving our countersuit, Emily's lawyer called to suggest mediation. The mediation session took place in a downtown conference room. Emily arrived with James and their attorney, looking tired and older than I'd seen her since high school. I came with Robert and Sarah for moral support. The mediator, a calm woman in her 60s, began by outlining the situation as she understood it. "Mrs. Miller, you canceled vendor payments for your daughter's wedding. Can you explain your reasoning?" I pulled out the now famous photo of my table. I was seated next to garbage bins at a wedding I'd largely financed. After being excluded from planning, photos, and recognition, I decided I wouldn't continue funding a celebration that treated me as an embarrassment. Emily's lawyer jumped in. "Mrs. Miller, surely you understand that wedding logistics are complex. Perhaps the seating was simply an oversight." Robert slid copies of witness statements across the table. "We have testimony from 5 wedding guests, 2 vendors and 3 staff members confirming that Mrs. Miller's placement was deliberate and discussed in advance by the Hampton family." The mediator studied the statements. "Mrs. Hampton, how do you respond to these accounts?" Emily stared at the papers for a long moment. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes, but for the first time in months, they seemed genuine. "I can't respond to it," she said quietly. "There's no excuse for what we did." Her lawyer looked surprised. "Emily, we discussed strategy." "No," Emily said more firmly. "There's no defense for this. We were wrong. I was wrong." James reached for her hand. "Emily's right. We failed her completely." The admission seemed to deflate the entire proceeding. Emily's lawyer attempted damage control, but without his client's cooperation, there wasn't much he could do. By the end of the session, we'd reached an agreement. No money would change hands, no further lawsuits would be filed, and both sides would refrain from further public statements about the incident. As we prepared to leave, Emily approached me by the elevators. "Mom, can we talk privately for a minute?" I nodded, and we stepped away from the others. "I've been in therapy," she said, "individual and couples counseling with James. The therapist helped me understand some things about how I've been treating you. I waited for her to continue. I think I stopped seeing you as a person sometime during law school. You became this resource. Someone who was always there to help, always available when I needed something, always willing to sacrifice for my benefit. I took that for granted, and I took you for granted. She was crying now, and these tears felt different from the manipulative ones I'd grown accustomed to. The seating arrangement wasn't an accident. Patricia convinced me that having you prominently placed would send the wrong message about our family's status. And I went along with it because I was ashamed of where I came from. And you represented everything I wanted to leave behind. The honesty was painful but necessary. Emily, I said carefully, what do you want from me now? I want a chance to build a real relationship with you. Not one where you give everything and I take it all for granted. I want to know who you are when you're not just being my mother. I want to learn how to be your daughter in a way that actually means something. I studied her face, looking for the calculation that had replaced genuine emotion in recent years. Instead, I saw vulnerability in what looked like authentic remorse. It can't go back to how it was, I said. I won't be the emergency fund or the unconditional support system that gets no support in return. I won't be someone you love only when it's convenient. I don't want it to go back, she said. I want it to be better. I want it to be real. We talked for another hour in the coffee shop downstairs from the mediation center. Emily told me about the pressure she felt in the Hampton family, how Patricia had systematically convinced her that I was a liability to their social standing. She described the constant anxiety about maintaining appearances, the way she'd lost herself trying to become someone she thought would be more acceptable. I told her about the loneliness I'd felt watching her pull away while continuing to fund her life. I described the pain of feeling erased from her story, of being treated as an embarrassing reminder of her actual origins rather than the foundation that had made her success possible. I'd like to try again, Emily said as we prepared to leave. Slowly, carefully, with actual respect for who you are instead of just what you can do for me. I'd like that too, I said, but it will take time to rebuild trust, and it will require consistent actions, not just words. We agreed to start with lunch once a month, neutral territory where we could talk without the weight of our old patterns. No requests for money, no crisis calls, no emergencies that required my immediate response. Just two women learning to know each other as people, rather than playing the roles of demanding daughter and giving mother. 6 months later, those monthly lunches had become something I actually looked forward to. Emily was in individual therapy, working through her issues with identity and self-worth. She and James had moved out of the Hampton family compound and into their own apartment, establishing independence from Patricia's controlling influence. More importantly, Emily had started asking about my life, not my availability to help with her problems, but my actual interests, feelings, and experiences. She wanted to know about my job, my friendships, my hopes for retirement. She asked about my relationship with her father, about my childhood, about the dreams I'd set aside to focus on raising her. I realized I know almost nothing about who you are as a person, she said during one of our lunches. I could tell someone what you've done for me, but I couldn't describe your personality, your sense of humor, your fears, your aspirations. That's not a relationship. That's just exploitation. The pearl necklace still sits in my jewelry box, waiting. Maybe someday Emily will be ready for it, ready for the history and responsibility it represents. Or maybe it will go to someone else who will understand what it means. What I learned from this experience is that sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children is the example of someone who refuses to be diminished. Sometimes love means teaching them that respect isn't optional, even in family relationships. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling behavior that hurts both of you. The wedding that made headlines became a turning point for both of us. Emily learned that actions have consequences, that relationships require mutual respect, and that love without reciprocity isn't sustainable. I learned that my worth isn't determined by how much I'm willing to sacrifice, that boundaries are expressions of self-love, and that it's never too late to demand the treatment you deserve. A year after the wedding, I received an unexpected visitor. James arrived at my door on a Tuesday evening, looking nervous but determined. "Mrs. Miller, I have something to ask you," he said. "Emily and I want to renew our vows on our first anniversary. A small ceremony, just immediate family and close friends. We'd like you to be there, and we'd like you to sit in the front row where you belong." "What about Patricia?" I asked. James smiled. "Patricia will be there too, but she won't be planning anything. We've learned to set boundaries with my family as well. The renewal ceremony was everything the original wedding wasn't. Simple, genuine, focused on the relationships that mattered rather than the impression being made. I sat in the front row, wore my blue dress, and watched my daughter marry her husband again, with intention and maturity rather than social ambition. During the reception, a casual gathering in Emily and James's backyard, Emily gave a speech. "A year ago, I made a terrible mistake," she said, looking directly at me. "I let social pressure convince me that my past was something to be ashamed of, that the people who made my success possible were somehow less valuable than the people I wanted to impress. I hurt the most important person in my life because I was too insecure to value what we really had together." She paused, tears in her eyes. "My mother taught me to be strong, independent, and successful. What she couldn't teach me was that those qualities are meaningless without integrity, gratitude, and love. I had to learn that the hard way, and I'm grateful every day that she was brave enough to teach me that lesson, even when it cost us both so much pain." After the ceremony, Emily and I walked through her small garden together. She'd planted herbs and vegetables, things she could nurture and harvest, a far cry from the ornamental perfection of the Hampton family estate. "I want to show you something," she said, leading me to a small greenhouse in the corner of the yard. Inside, carefully tended in individual pots, were dozens of pearl-colored flowers. "They're called grandmother's pearls," she said. "I started growing them as a reminder of what real value looks like, not the kind you buy or inherit, but the kind you create through love and sacrifice and time." I started crying then, seeing my daughter not as the entitled young woman who had hidden me away at her wedding, but as someone who had done the hard work of understanding what she'd lost and what she wanted to rebuild. "Are you ready for the real pearls now?" I asked. She nodded, crying too. "I think I finally understand what they represent." 2 weeks later, I placed my grandmother's pearl necklace around Emily's neck, just as Robert had done for me 30 years earlier. But this time, the gesture meant something different. These weren't just family heirlooms being passed down. They were symbols of a relationship that had been broken and rebuilt, stronger and more honest than before. "Now you're truly a part of our family's story," I whispered as I fastened the clasp. "Not because of what you've achieved or who you married, but because of who you choose to be." Emily touched the pearls gently. "Tell me about the women who wore these before me." So I did. I told her about her great-great-grandmother, who wore them as a young bride fleeing poverty in Ireland, about her great-grandmother who wore them while raising 6 children during the Depression, about her grandmother who wore them to my father's funeral when she was barely 30 years old. "They all faced hard choices," I said. "They all had to decide what kind of women they wanted to be, what kind of legacy they wanted to leave. These pearls have been witness to courage, sacrifice, love, and resilience. Now they're yours to add your own story to." As I finish telling this story, I'm sitting in my sunroom watching snow fall in my garden. My phone shows a missed call from Emily, but I'm not rushing to call back. Not because I don't care, but because I've learned that my time, attention, and love are valuable gifts, not automatic entitlements. The woman who sat next to garbage bins at her daughter's wedding was broken, desperate for any scrap of affection or recognition. The woman I am now knows her worth. I'm not perfect, I'm not a saint, but I'm something much more important. I'm someone who learned to love herself enough to demand the respect she deserved. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been taken for granted by the people you love most, if you've ever wondered whether you matter enough to set boundaries and demand better treatment, I want you to know this: you do matter. Your feelings are valid. Your dignity is non-negotiable. Sometimes the people who need to learn these lessons most are the ones we love the most. And sometimes, teaching them requires us to walk away from tables next to garbage bins and refuse to accept anything less than the love and respect we've always deserved. The pearl necklace Emily wears now carries forward the stories of all the strong women who came before her, but it also carries a new story, the story of a mother who loved her daughter enough to risk their relationship in order to save it, and a daughter who was brave enough to change. That might be the most valuable inheritance of all.